and all day long on Twitter. And right now, I send you to Washington with Hallie Jackson.
Thank you, Steph. We have a very big and busy show. Very busy, starting with what's happening live now on Capitol Hill. The Russia investigation again in the spotlight. You're looking live. The #2 guy in the Department of Justice getting ready to testify and getting ready for some potentially tough questions about bias on those anti-Trump texts allegedly sent by a former special counsel staffer. We are monitoring this. We are also breaking down the once-in-a-generation stunning upset in Alabama with the top 3 things you need to watch for today with Doug Jones and Roy Moore, and an interview in just moments with the top Republican lawmaker about where this all goes from here. And since elections have consequences, we're also watching this. Getting ready, you see him live there, for Chuck Schumer, where the senator is expected to ask to slam the brakes on taxes until Democrat Doug Jones gets to town. Chances seem slim, but it all comes just hours before President Trump makes his final big push for his plan. We have a very, very busy hour ahead, but we start with Alabama and the shockwaves that are still being felt right now after Doug Jones' victory over Roy Moore. Here's the top 3 things you should watch for today, because we are. Number 1, will Roy Moore concede? He didn't last night. He says he wanted to sleep on it. So as he wakes up this morning, where does he go from here? What's the Republican reaction? We're already getting some in. They had been set to meet if Roy Moore had won. Obviously, that didn't happen. So the scramble in the Senate is something we are looking for today. And how will Democrats capitalize, if at all? What are they going to try to do? And how does that unfold? We're talking about all of those things over the next 60 minutes here. And we're starting on the ground in Alabama and over at the White House. I want to begin in Montgomery with NBC's Gabe Gutierrez, hardest working guy in TV right now. So, Gabe, what are you hearing about a Roy Moore potential concession now that a recount is no longer in the realm of possibility?
Oh, hi there, Hallie. Good morning. That is a big question right now. When will Roy Moore concede? He surprised some folks last night by saying that this was not over, that he still planned to, possibly contest the results of this election. But when he came out and said that, the result was much closer. There's a 0.7% difference now, at least 1.5% difference. And so election officials here say an automatic recount wouldn't kick in unless it was 1/2 or 1 percentage point of a margin of victory. So the Jones campaign, on the other hand, is elated. And let's take a listen at what both campaigns had to say last night, Hallie.
Folks, I got to tell you, I think that I have been waiting all my life, and now I just don't know what the hell to say. At the end of the day, this entire race has been about dignity and respect.
When the vote is this close, that it's not over. And we've still got to go by the rules about this recount provision. What we've got to do is wait on God and let this process play out.
So now we're waiting to see exactly when that concession will happen. And Hallie, I will tell you, speaking with several more supporters last night, we did get the sense that they are still very upset at how this went down from the perspective of the Republican establishment. They really blame Senator Richard Shelby for his comments that he was writing in an unnamed candidate, and that Alabama deserved better, in his words. They really saw that as a betrayal, and they say that they are so upset with not just him, but also Mitch McConnell, something that we had been hearing from, at least in the last couple of weeks of the race, this anger towards the GOP establishment, Hallie.
Yeah, this has definitely set up that battle even more than we've seen. Gabe, thank you. We're going to talk more about that Shelby factor and the write-ins coming up in just a moment with Steve Kornacki. But before we get there, I want to go to NBC's Kristen Welker at the White House. And Kristen, Roy Moore supporters in Alabama aren't the only ones who are upset about this. I know that you and I have this piece out looking at some new reporting on what's going on inside the White House, including now we've just learned a bit of a staff shakeup.
That's right. Let's get to that staff shakeup first, Hallie, and then we can look at some of the finger pointing that's going on behind the scenes here at the White House. We just learned moments ago that Omarosa Manigault Newman has resigned. Let me read you the statement that we got from the White House. Omarosa Manigault Newman resigned yesterday to pursue other opportunities. Her departure will not be effective until January 20th, 2018. We wish her the best in future endeavors and are grateful for her service. She was the communications director for the Office of Public Liaison. She did a lot of the outreach, Hallie, to the African-American community here at the White House. In fact, she was in Mississippi over the weekend when the president stopped there for the opening of that Civil Rights Museum. No indication over the weekend that she was planning to resign, so somewhat of a surprise, but possibly not to the folks here behind the scenes at the White House. So we'll drill down on that today. But in terms of the fallout from Alabama, in terms of what they are saying here behind the scenes at the White House, a lot of finger pointing, particularly for the political shop. Bill Stepien, who kind of heads that operation. A lot of folks here saying that he perhaps dropped the ball. Should President Trump have endorsed Roy Moore in the first place? That's the type of debate that's going on behind the scenes here. But there's some real concern that this may be an indication that President Trump's political strength has been damaged, and certainly it calls into question. Go ahead, Hal.
No, I was going to say Chuck Todd this morning, Kristen, on that point, said that Donald Trump is essentially a political toxin right now.
Well, that's right. And so look at the numbers in Alabama. Stunning in terms of his popularity there, a state that he won overwhelmingly just a year ago.
Right.
48% approve, 48% disapprove. But it's the intensity in those numbers. 41% strongly disapprove, Hallie.
And speaking of those numbers, Kristen Welker, you are teeing us up very nicely for our friend Steve Kornacki, who is here joining us to walk through some of this data. Steve, as I know you've been buried in it over the last 12 to 18 hours or so. He's there at the interactive board at 30 Rock. So this seems to be, Kristen talked about the president's low approval ratings in Alabama, but what seemed to have made the difference were people, suburban women specifically, and members of the African-American community not voting for Roy Moore.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you're a Democrat, you win in Alabama. You see how narrow this margin is. You really can't say it's one thing, one group, one phenomenon. Everything all has to come together, and it really did for Jones last night here. The highlights, though, of what his coalition entailed. Number one, you said it was turnout, black voter turnout, particularly, in this part of the state, in the city of Birmingham as well. You had not just strong support. I mean, the exit polls said 96% of black voters going for Jones, but you had turnout, a share of the electorate that was black that was higher than when Barack Obama ran. So that turnout was a huge factor as well. But again, that turnout alone is not going to do it, because Barack Obama had great black turnout in Alabama and he still got crushed. If you're a Democrat, you need defections from traditionally Republican voters, and we saw two very different types of things going on with this. Number one was in the suburbs, particularly a great example here is right outside of Birmingham, Shelby County. Republicans should be getting 75% plus here in this county. Roy Moore only got 56%. This counts as a catastrophe for a Republican to only get 56%. You should be getting a huge number of votes out of here. Again, if Moore just performed as a Republican normally does in Shelby, Moore might win this race statewide. It could make that much of a difference in what you saw in the suburbs there, you saw across the state. And one other quickly, these two college counties, I'll give you one right here. Lee County, this is where Auburn University is, War Eagle. Well, Donald Trump got almost 60% of the vote here. Roy Moore could barely crack 40. We saw it across the state as well in Tuscaloosa. Young voters, college age, a little older than college, young professionals, another big defection from the Republican Party there.
Steve, you mentioned Shelby County, and it brings up the Shelby factor, right? Richard Shelby coming out over the weekend saying that he's writing in somebody, doing everything he could. He didn't back Doug Jones, but he sure as heck did not back Roy Moore. That seemed to have played a factor, right, in the write-in part of this? Yeah, I mean, so we could show you the statewide. So, look, 22,000, about 2% of the vote is a write-in vote in this election. This is an unusually high, this is a very high number for Alabama. You can see here it's basically the margin in this race. I think, look, in the presidential election in 2016, there were about 20,000 write-in votes. That was also very high. A lot of people didn't like the choice then. A lot of them obviously didn't like the choice last night. The question here was, I think, it probably were these typically Republican voters. A good guess is they probably were. Does that mean that they otherwise would have voted for Moore? Who knows? Maybe they were close to voting for Jones and the write-in saved them from doing that. So I know there's a lot of commentary out there looking at this margin right here in this race and say, well, the write-ins, that's the difference. I wouldn't be so sure we know how those write-ins would have been split if they had a gun to their head. Yeah. Steve Kornacki, it is such a pleasure to have you on these last couple of days. I really appreciate it. Good luck to you later on in the day. We'll be checking back in with you. But before we do, I want to talk about what you're seeing on your screen right now. Rod Rosenstein, he is testifying now in front of the House Judiciary Committee. This is an oversight hearing. This is going to be really interesting. There could really be some fireworks, which is why we are keeping a really close eye on that. We're going to dip back in and bring you any news as it develops. But when we talk about the Alabama race, because that's obviously our other big headline, there are clearly some winners and losers here, right? So I want to show you what we think the winners and losers are. Winners include, of course, Doug Jones and the Democrats. That is an obvious one. African-American voters, big turnout, big enthusiasm. We're going to have an interesting commentary on why the Me Too movement may have come out ahead after Alabama. And interestingly, Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans, I'm going to throw them in the win column for now because partly the victory by Doug Jones saves some of these Senate Republicans from having to answer for Roy Moore on a daily basis in 2018. But you know what? Those Republicans, they're also on the loser column, too, because now a lot of action in the Senate just became a little bit more difficult with Doug Jones in. Other losers in this race, Donald Trump, after endorsing Roy Moore, he's trying to save face, as Kristen Welker mentioned, tweeting, hey, he backed Luther Strange originally. You've also got Steve Bannon and the RNC in that column, too. Let's talk about Steve Bannon for a second with my next guest, Congressman Peter King, Republican from New York, who has graciously agreed to join us on the show. Congressman, you tweeted earlier this morning that the GOP must, quote, do the right thing and dump Steve Bannon. What do you mean by that? And isn't that not your call to make?
Well, listen, I'm a voice within the Republican Party. More important than that, I'm an American. And I really wasn't putting that out as a political tweet. That was both governmental, it was moral. I don't think Steve Bannon adds anything positive at all to the dialogue in the country. I don't know who would identify with him. And to see him on the stage this week with the big American flag behind him, he looked like some disheveled drunk that wandered in off the street. To have him become the face of politics or to have a major voice in politics, I think is wrong. I think we should shut him. I think we should cut him off. And I'd say this whether it's a Democrat or Republican. I just don't see what he adds to it. He encourages racial division. Again, with the charges against Roy Moore, there's no way of knowing whether they're true or not. But the fact is there were serious allegations, and Roy Moore never answered them. He gave some half-hearted denial on Sean Hannity's show, and yet Bannon was somehow attacking those making the allegations. It just, to me, it was wrong. And after Charlottesville, he was saying how racial division can be good for the country. This is just wrong. So I was going after him. He has no role in the party or in politics, as far as I'm concerned.
Congressman, having covered Steve Bannon in this administration during the campaign, I can only imagine, and I don't know, that he's sitting here gleeful that a Republican like yourself, somebody who would be considered an establishment Republican, is taking aim at him. Isn't this exactly what he wants?
Listen, I'm no establishment Republican. I'm a real blue-collar conservative, not the phony type from Goldman Sachs like Steve Bannon. I grew up in the streets of New York. My father was a city cop. I was a union member. So I'm no establishment guy at all. I will fight anybody. And Steve Bannon posing as some kind of above it all, above the establishment, he's more establishment than anyone, except he's a phony about it. So no, listen, if he wants to fight, I'm all set for him. I don't care about that. But the fact is, I also want President Trump to succeed. And this summer, I think, one of the first to call for Steve Bannon to be removed from the White House. He was undermining the president. He was undermining the president's foreign policy, and he did not belong in the White House.
We just spoke with one of your colleagues over on the other side of the Capitol, Senator Bob Corker. Here's what he had to say. Listen.
I've tried to reach Dick Shelby this morning to let him know how proud I am of his state and for what he did. And again, I know this is not something that I know we're supposed to cheer for our side of the aisle, if you will, but I'm really, really happy with what happened for all of us in our nation, for people serving in the Senate, to not have to deal with what likely we were going to have to deal with should the outcome have been the other way.
Congressman King, are you also really, really happy that Doug Jones got elected?
Well, I'm certainly glad that Roy Moore lost, and the only alternative to that was Doug Jones. I mean, I've been asked several times on national shows before the election if I would support Roy Moore, and I said no. I didn't inject myself in the race because my wife is from Georgia, and she told me the last thing from the people in Alabama want is some guy from New York be telling them what to do. But I made it clear that I was opposed to Roy Moore.
Very quickly before I let you go, Senator Schumer is, in the next couple of minutes here, calling on Republicans to push back their tax plan vote until Doug Jones gets seated. You can see Senator Schumer there. Will the GOP consider this, delaying a vote on the tax bill until after Doug Jones gets to town?
I'm sure they won't. Listen, I'm going to vote no on the tax bill, but on the other hand, the rules are the rules, and Doug Jones, I don't know when he's going to get sworn in. But listen, it was the other way around. The Democrats would do the same thing. So I'm not saying change the rules or bend the rules, even though, again, I'm against the tax bill. So I hope it goes down.
Congressman Peter King, thank you very much for joining us on this show with that perspective. I appreciate it. We want to bring in now members of our panel, folks that are going to be joining me here to talk about everything that has happened over the last 24 hours. We've got John Archibald, columnist at Alabama Media Group and AL.com, joining us from Birmingham. We've also got Tamara Keith, NPR White House correspondent and host of the NPR Politics podcast, and Carol Lee, NBC national political reporter, who is joining me here on set. Guys, thank you all for being here, and let's blast through some more of these winners and losers here and what we're watching for today. So, John, I want to start with you because you've written now about the Me Too movement and what this election means for that.
Right. Last night as things were getting close, I had to write 2 columns to get one ready, and the column I wrote about Roy Moore winning was the most depressing thing I've seen, because it essentially said what this says to women in Alabama who've been abused, who've been assaulted, who've been harassed, who have finally had a moment where they feel like they can open up and talk about it, are basically being told that we don't want to hear you. But on the other hand, a Doug Jones win gives those people hope, and it's quite a different statement. And there is a lot of relief from reasoned people here.
John, stand by. I want to bring in Tamara and Carol on this, because one of the other pieces that we're watching come into play today is what happens now in the Senate. You just heard Congressman King talk about how he wouldn't support, pushing a tax bill vote down the road. But when you look at what's going to happen come 2018, this election again has consequences here for both Democrats and for Republicans, Tamara.
Well, and certainly the margin is much narrower. It was already a narrow margin in
already
the Senate.
tight.
Now it's a one-vote margin.
How often does the Vice President have to come over for these tie-breaking votes? A lot. Right. A lot more than we've seen recently.
And you saw Bob Corker just now. He's clearly not he's not somebody who is always going to be a guaranteed yes vote for the next year.
I was on the phone overnight with White House sources, with people close to the administration, talking about what this all means and talking about how this plays into policy now. And there is an acknowledgement that, this is not ideal, obviously. But I also think Bob Corker, Susan Collins, these are people who are not afraid to criticize the president, and they may be the most powerful Republicans in Congress right now.
Right, and and the president really needs them for his agenda, and they've, as you said, been on the fence, and this does not help. Look, this is 2 things. There are policy implications in terms of the president's legislative agenda, obviously, and then there's a perception implication in the sense that the president is undoubtedly weakened, and if people aren't afraid of him,
he doesn't want to say that, Carol. He doesn't want to admit that he's weakened.
Right, but he is. Right. He's a 2-time loser on this one race.
One special election.
Right, one special election. And so, if they get through tax reform, what next? At what point do Republicans really start to decide? And you hear it with just the attacks on Steve Bannon, because that's not something we were hearing 2 days ago.
Exactly.
And now everyone feels freer to do it.
Speaking of attacks on Steve Bannon, Joe Biden had a little something to say this morning about this. The former vice president, who, by the way, is very close with Doug Jones. Here's what the former VP had to say.
I think probably some of the happiest people in America today are the Republicans in the Senate. The divisiveness that was caused within the Republican Party by Bannon and all the sort of bile that comes out of the administration, that it's just, and I know the majority of those members of the Senate and Republican side, and they're decent people.
Hey, John, down in Birmingham, is Joe Biden right? Did Republicans dodge a bullet here?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. Having Roy Moore in your midst is a poison that would have affected everybody. It has happened here, and it would have dragged them down there.
And let's remember the reason the Senate seat was open in the first place is because Donald Trump appointed Jeff Sessions to be his attorney general. Is that, when we look back after this administration, is that going to be among the greatest regrets of Donald Trump's administration?
It certainly seems like, for a number of reasons, that is the thing that sticks with. It just keeps haunting him, right?
It's Alabama, it's the DOJ, it's the special counsel.
It's Russia, it's everything.
Gets recusing himself, and then the special counsel being appointed.
John Archibald, thank you very much for joining us from Alabama after what I know was a late night for you. And hey, speaking of Jeff Sessions, I want to show you right now his number 2, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, over at the House Judiciary Committee in what is expected to be a fiery hearing, probably mostly focused on the special counsel investigation. We've just gotten through some of the opening statements right now. Remember, Rosenstein directly oversees the special counsel inquiry with Bob Mueller. And ahead of that, that hearing, the Justice Department has sent Congress 90 new pages, 90 new pages of text messages exchanged between an FBI lawyer and an agent who we now know was pulled off of Bob Mueller's team. A lot of those messages were pretty tough on Donald Trump. I want to bring in our NBC News Justice correspondent, Pete Williams, who is, Pete, I know, monitoring this Rosenstein hearing. We talked with you when Christopher Wray had his oversight hearing. We've seen Jeff Sessions asked about this special counsel probe when they were on the Hill. What do you expect to see today, particularly given Rosenstein's oversight role?
Very little about the Justice Department, lots about the special counsel investigation from Republicans who are concerned that it's politicized, lots about President Trump from the Democrats, Hallie.
And will Rosenstein have satisfactory answers? Pete, so far it seems as though neither side has been overly thrilled.
I think that's right. He will say that there's an independent counsel investigation going on about how the Clinton email investigation was handled. But now there are these new emails that have become public from an agent who worked on that and was assigned to Robert Mueller's team. Here's a look at those. The emails were exchanged between FBI agent Peter Strzok and an FBI lawyer, Lisa Page. The two were romantically involved. Sent between August 2015 and December 2016, most were exchanged before either party secured its nominee. But many of them were harshly critical of Donald Trump. One sent by Page to Strzok, March 2016, reads, "God, Trump is a loathsome human." On July 14, Strzok wrote about Trump, "It's clear he's capturing all the white, poor voters who the mainstream Republicans abandon and all but name in the quest for the almighty dollar." In other messages, the couple shared pro-Clinton views, Strzok telling Page, "God, Hillary should win 100 million to nothing." After Clinton was nominated, he wrote to Page, "Congrats on a woman nominated for president in a major party. About damn time." After the election, when Mr. Trump announced his choice of Senator Jeff Sessions for Attorney General, Strzok said, "Sessions for AG," to which Page responded, "Good God." When Mueller learned of the emails last summer, he removed Strzok from the team. Now, the Republican chairman, Bob Goodlatte, has already set the table on this, saying it shows that there's bias in the Clinton email investigation and the Mueller investigation. But the ranking Democrat, Jerry Nadler, is saying that there's nothing wrong about saying these things. It may be bad judgment, but it's not unethical. It doesn't even violate Justice Department rules on political activity. And there's been a call from Republicans for a special counsel to investigate how Mueller's doing in the investigation. But what Nadler says is, you have to have evidence of a crime to call for a special counsel, and while this may be bad judgment, there's no evidence that any laws were broken, Hallie.
Yeah, the president's legal team calling on that second special counsel to oversee the DOJ. Pete, I'm going to let you get back to watching that hearing for us and monitoring, and we'll bring you back with any news. And I want to bring in now our panel here. MSNBC Justice and Security Analyst Matt Miller, former chief spokesperson for the Justice Department. Tamara and Carol also still here on set. You heard Pete mention Congressman Nadler. Should point out he just is in the process of delivering his opening statement live. You're looking right now, obviously, at Rod Rosenstein getting ready to deliver his remarks. So we're going to hear from Rosenstein. It looks as though, from the movement from photographers on the House floor there, he's getting ready to begin, getting sworn in now. So he's going to speak for a little bit, and then we expect the real fireworks to start, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. And these texts will obviously be a big part of it. Something fishy is going on at the Justice Department. Look, these texts, if you look at them, FBI agents are allowed to have political opinions. DOJ employees are allowed to have political opinions. What matters is if it affects their work. And there's no sign yet, of course, it's under investigation by the Inspector General. Right, there's no sign that it did affect their work. But what is strange that's happened in the last 24 hours? So there's an ongoing Inspector General investigation into this very question about whether these agents acted appropriately. The Justice Department turned over these text messages to Congress in the middle of that investigation. Arguably appropriate. They do it sometimes, others they don't. But that's not all they did. They brought reporters over to the Justice Department last night, gave these texts to reporters. These are career FBI agents who have due process rights, and they leaked them out to press in advance of this hearing. I don't know whether it was to get Rosenstein credit. I don't know whether it was to get Rosenstein credit with Republicans on this committee, or if the political leadership at DOJ is committed to undermining the Bob Mueller investigation. Either way, it's something DOJ never does, and it's a pretty inappropriate thing for them to have done here.
You worked at DOJ.
I worked at DOJ.
You
we never did anything like this.
There is a growing sense that this effort is, while in some ways legitimate to scrutinize, is just a roundabout way to attack the Russia investigation. And you can't separate the two. The president's legal team has tried to, and you just can't. They overlap, they're related, and there's a growing perception that it's all just designed to do, rather than go directly at the Russia investigation of Robert Mueller, to just go around it and kind of attack
backdoor
from behind.
it almost. Well, let me ask you this, Matt. How would you be advising Rod Rosenstein when he gets these questions, as he inevitably will in the next 25, 30 minutes here? If you were still at the DOJ, what would you be telling him to say, to respond?
Follow the rules, follow precedent, do what DOJ always does. Don't do things like leaking out people's reporters in the middle of investigation. Don't talk about investigations. Don't talk about what they're doing. And defend the work of career agents. Defend the special counsel and say, look, if there are questions about employees, we will deal with that. We will take the appropriate action. But this is an investigation that needs to be respected. We need to let the special counsel speak in court. We need to stop the political attacks on it. He needs to handle this the way previous attorneys general and previous deputy attorneys general have handled these types of situations.
Pete Williams alluded to this, that multiple congressional Republicans have now called for an investigation into the DOJ, a second special counsel, basically, on top of the DOJ, on top of the FBI. If presumably Rosenstein will get asked about this, Tamara, does he just flat out say, nope, no need for it? Yeah. Can he say that? Should he say that?
He'll say there's an ongoing Inspector General investigation, and that's the correct venue. Almost certainly that's what he'll say.
And you think so too, Matt?
Yeah, so look, here's the problem with these calls for a second special counsel. Special counsels don't exist just to investigate things that people on the Hill don't like. The Department of Justice investigates criminal violations. Of all these things Republicans are complaining about, inappropriate texts, people on Mueller's team having attended Hillary Clinton's victory party, none of those are violations of law. None of those are criminal acts. And the Department of Justice does not go rummaging around appointing special counsels because people on the Hill are unhappy about political issues.
So, Rod, you're looking again, Rod Rosenstein right now delivering his opening statement. Then when he takes questions, that's when we expect things to get a little bit thorny. But on the other side of your screen, if we can, I'd like to show a little bit of video from about an hour ago. Donald Trump Jr. leaving a hotel here in Washington, presumably headed back over to the Hill. This is a little bit of deja vu. We just saw this last week, but Trump Jr. again going presumably to speak with members of Senate intelligence. Remember last time he said, attorney-client privilege, as you look at Don Jr. there? Is he going to get away with that? Is he going to be able to use that argument again in this setting with Senate Intel? Tamara, Carol, Matt, whoever wants to take it?
I think he probably can if he wants to try. Look,
so he'll say it again?
He may. We'll see. Here's the thing. That almost certainly wasn't an appropriate assertion of attorney-client privilege. There are some rare circumstances under which it might have been.
But he asserted it, and he didn't have to answer questions.
That's right. But he can get away with it with the Hill committees because they're unlikely to take these steps they'd have to do to enforce it, going to court, holding him in contempt.
Although this weekend on Meet the Press, you did hear some folks talk about potentially subpoenaing, making this not voluntary so that he can't then rely on the attorney-client privilege argument.
It would take so long for them to litigate it in court to force an answer. It would be months and months from now. Where it will really come up is when he is interviewed by Bob Mueller, and Mueller will not put up with that kind of answer.
The two of you nodding.
That's exactly right. I mean, if it worked and when he went before the House investigator, why wouldn't he also do it for the Senate? And it's kind
of like every kid learns that when they're little, right?
If you got away with it, just keep going. And it's like Matt said, it would take months for them to enforce this, and so of course he's going to try to do it. And anyone who was representing him would tell him to do that.
So it's not just Donald Trump Jr. appearing on the Hill. You've also had members of White House staff, people inside the White House, doing these interviews with the special counsel when you look at that particular inquiry. And NBC News has spoken with Ty Cobb, who is the president's internal lawyer, about this investigation. He says all the White House interviews are over. Now, I will tell you that in private conversations with sources in the White House, they had always expected the interviews to be wrapped up by the end of November, beginning of December, which is where we are now. But Cobb also says that the Trump camp hopes the special counsel's office brings its probe to a, quote, prompt and appropriate conclusion. Your reaction?
You know who hasn't been interviewed yet by the special counsel?
Donald Trump.
That's exactly right. This investigation will not be over, at least, until that
So
interview
you think
takes
that's
place.
where we're going?
I think that's where we're going. I think Mike Pence hasn't been interviewed yet, to our knowledge. He almost certainly will be. We are nowhere near the end of this investigation. It's a political ploy by Trump's attorneys.
And that statement is not a statement of hope. That is a statement of saying, Robert Mueller, you'd better hurry up. Yeah. We want you to hurry up. He's projecting a message.
Yeah. We want to go back to what you're looking at on your screen here. The first question to the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. We're going to listen in to how this is unfolding for a minute.
Was tainted for political purposes. Would that be a justification in your mind to reopen the investigation?
Mr. Chairman, we are certainly anticipating the outcome of that Inspector General investigation. As you know, that's been ongoing for some time. I'm hopeful that it'll be concluded within the next couple of months. And when we get those results, we'll take appropriate action. I don't know exactly what the findings are going to be, but it's always appropriate for us to review any findings of impropriety or misconduct and take appropriate action.
When you announced your decision to terminate the employment of FBI Director Comey, in that decision, you announced some practices that I took it to mean you thought were inappropriate actions on the part of the former FBI director. Do you think that those actions on his part would merit further investigation into how that whole matter was conducted?
Mr. Chairman, as you're aware, the Inspector General is conducting an investigation into the handling of that Hillary Clinton email investigation, and I believe that the matters that you've referred to are part of his investigation. The memo that you're familiar with that I provided reflects my personal opinion. It's not an official finding of misconduct. That's the Inspector General's job. He'll reach his own independent determination. But as you pointed out, my views about it are already known.
Are you aware of any prior efforts by the Judiciary Committee, this committee, to unduly restrict the ability of the intelligence community to do its job of protecting our national security?
I'm not personally aware of any, no, sir.
Are you aware that this committee has primary oversight of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act due in part to the significant constitutional and legal questions that government surveillance raises?
Mr. Chairman, I respect the Congress's decision about which committee has oversight. I know that both this committee and the Intelligence Committee have an interest in that issue.
Well, given that you understand this committee's jurisdiction and its history of providing the intelligence community with the tools it needs, why would we, in the words of the department, attempt to, quote, dismantle Section 702 of our nation's most important surveillance program?
Well, I certainly would hope that wouldn't be the case. I don't know who made the statement you're referring to. I know the department obviously has expressed its opinion about the reauthorization, which we think is critically important of Section 702. I respect there are differences of opinion, but I think the department has been very clear that we believe it's essential to national security that Section 702 be reauthorized.
Well, we agree with you that it's essential that Section 702 be reauthorized. We also believe that it's essential that the civil liberties of American citizens be protected and that a standard be imposed on the examination of information about U.S. citizens incidentally gathered as a part of the Section 702 program with the surveillance of non-U.S. citizens outside the United States, but incidentally gathering information about U.S. citizens and then being looked into by agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation without a warrant. I'm not aware of that being appropriate in any other type of investigation that they might conduct. And we're not talking about terrorist attacks. We're not talking about national security because we have clearly distinguished that. We're simply talking about crimes that have already occurred that are being investigated as they should be investigated by the department, but under the procedures that the American people would expect that they would follow to protect their civil liberties in other circumstances.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, I've had the advantage over the last 8 months of having a role in overseeing our national security operations. I discussed this with Director Wray yesterday, and if you'd like, I could give you a detailed explanation. It might take a couple of minutes, but I'd be happy to give you some details. But the bottom line is that it really is critical to national security that the FBI have the ability to query the data. That's the issue here.
And our legislation allows them to do that. But if the query provides a hit that they want to read an email, they want to see other documentation, they want to see in its full form, they're required to get a warrant under those circumstances.
And I discussed this with Director Wray, and what happens when the FBI conducts these queries, Mr. Chairman, is that typically they're leads that are not necessarily based on probable cause, but based on a lead, a suspicion, and the ability to query that data and then follow up on it gives the FBI the opportunity to put two and two together to connect the dots.
There are lots of leads that any law enforcement person would like to pursue, but we have protections against them pursuing it without appropriate standard for doing it in a whole host of other ways to protect people from unreasonable searches. And this is a search of information about a United States citizen.
Well, it's a query as a constitutional matter. What we're
allow the initial query. Once that results in something the agent wants to look at, I don't see how you distinguish the further reading of emails or other things from a search.
If I could take a couple of minutes, I could explain to you, I talked with Director Wray about an appropriate way to explain this publicly. Hypothetically, let's say, for example, that local police department receives a call that somebody has purchased a large quantity of hydrogen peroxide, and something made the clerk at the store suspicious about that, so he contacts the local police. There's no probable cause. There's nothing illegal about what the person did, but something that caused concern. The local police may...
General Rosenstein, let me interrupt you, because the very specific instance that you are citing was cited to us in our discussions with the FBI, and that very specific protection for the FBI was added to our legislation.
Right. Well, the example I'm providing is a situation where there would not be probable cause, but we think it would be appropriate for the FBI to follow up. And what we're trying to avoid is a situation where we re-erect a wall that would prevent the FBI from gaining access to information that might allow them to connect a lead to information that implicates national security.
Thank you. My time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. On Monday, Ranking Member Cummings and I wrote you a letter, sir, about the majority's ongoing investigation into the investigation of former Secretary Clinton. Without objection, I ask unanimous consent that our letter be placed into the record.
Without objection, it will be made a part of the record.
Thank you. For the first part of our letter discusses the department's failure to provide the minority with access to the documents you've already provided to the majority. Yes or no, will you commit to ensuring that the minority, that we receive equal access to any materials you may provide to this committee in the future?
Yes, and I believe my understanding is that that information may have been provided to the
I'm not
ranking
interested
member.
in the past at this point. Thank you. That's what I wanted. I have a lot of questions. The majority of this committee, the White House, and President Trump's private attorneys have all called for the Department of Justice to appoint a new special counsel to investigate a number of Hillary Clinton-related matters. I think we could benefit from your experience in how the special counsel regulations work. The regulations say the Attorney General, or in your case, the Acting Attorney General, will appoint the special counsel when you determine that 1, criminal investigation of a person or matter is warranted, and 2, the investigation either presents a conflict of interest to the department or some other strong public interest requires you to appoint the special counsel. That first part, when he or she determines that criminal investigation of a person or matter is warranted, is that part of the regulations optional?
No, that isn't part of the regulations.
Thank you. So a criminal investigation must first be determined to be warranted before you can assign a special counsel to the matter?
Yes.
Thank you. And at the Department of Justice, a criminal investigation requires an initial assessment and a preliminary review of the evidence?
Correct.
Has that assessment been made with respect to former Director Comey's handling of the Hillary Clinton investigation?
I'm not going to comment on any investigations in the normal course. Before we made a determination, we would conduct an appropriate review.
And I assume your answer would be the same if I asked you about the FBI's interaction with Fusion GPS?
Would be the same for anything, yes.
Then presuming for a moment that the department has conducted an initial assessment and found no predicate for a criminal investigation, so in plain English, there is no ongoing criminal investigation. Under this presumption, could you or the Attorney General Sessions simply appoint a special counsel to look into these matters?
No.
As I said earlier, to my knowledge, there's been no credible factual or legal claim that anybody at the department violated any law by deciding not to bring charges or by attempting to meet with Fusion GPS. If that is true, if there is no underlying criminal investigation because there is insufficient evidence of a crime, in this or any other case, do the regulations permit you to appoint a special counsel?
No.
Thank you. According to the department, the Office of the Inspector General informed Special Counsel Mueller of the existence of these text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page on July 27, 2017. The text you sent us last night. Mr. Mueller immediately concluded that Mr. Strzok could no longer participate in the investigation, and he was removed from the team the same day. Did Mr. Mueller take appropriate action in this case?
Yes, he did.
Thank you. In testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, you said that you would only fire Special Counsel Mueller for good cause, and that you had not seen any yet. Several months have passed since then. Have you seen good cause to fire Special Counsel Mueller?
No.
Thank you. If you were ordered today to fire Mr. Mueller, what would you do?
So I've explained previously, I would follow the regulation. If there were good cause, I would act. If there were no good cause, I would not.
And you've seen no good cause so far?
Correct.
Thank you. On May 1st, the Office of Legal Counsel issued an opinion arguing that ranking minority members do not have the authority to conduct oversight, unquote. Shortly thereafter, Politico reported that the White House counsel instructed federal agencies not to cooperate with oversight requests from Democrats. Since then, Democrats on this committee have written more than 40 letters to the administration without any meaningful response thus far. Can you clarify your current position on responding to letters from the minority? And are you concerned that the department's May 1st opinion serves to justify a policy of stonewalling by the administration?
My position, Congressman, is that we make every effort to respond to any legitimate inquiry from a member of Congress. Obviously, we prioritize inquiries propounded by the chair on behalf of the committee, but we'll make an effort to respond to any inquiry. We get a lot of letters.
I'm sure.
And so I apologize if there's a
Would you
delay,
prioritize after letters from the chair, letters from the minority?
Our goal is to respond to all those letters in a reasonable manner. In fact, when our new Assistant Attorney General, Stephen Boyd, took office, there was quite a backlog.
And would you encourage the Office of Legal Counsel to withdraw its May 1st opinion?
I'll take a look at it, Congressman, but as I said, without regard to what the law may require, our policy is to try to
I understand that, but you would take a look at whether you would encourage the Office of Legal Counsel to withdraw that May 1st opinion.
Well, I'm not committing to do anything. I will agree to look at it.
Okay, thank you. And finally, I just want to say and follow up with what the chairman was saying about Section 702. The bill that this committee reported specifically said basically said it, where you're doing a counterintelligence or foreign or terrorism investigation, you don't need a warrant to query Section 702 data. But where you're conducting an investigation of domestic crimes, then, like any other investigation of domestic crimes, you would need a warrant. So that the danger that I think you were referring to is taken care of by the bill, and I endorse the comment of the chairman to that effect, and I think you should take a look at that. I urge you to take a look at that. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rosenstein, I am concerned that the special counsel may be casting too wide of a net, that he is trying to catch all the fish in the ocean, not just the Soviet sharks. And if the special counsel were to obtain information not directly related to Russian interference with the election, and he wanted to investigate that further, would he need to obtain your authority to expand the investigation?
Yes, he would.
Okay. Has he ever asked to expand the scope of the investigation?
I appreciate that question, Congressman. If I could explain briefly, there are a lot of media stories speculating about what the special counsel may or may not be doing. I know what he's doing. I'm appropriately exercising my oversight responsibilities, and so I can assure you that the special counsel is conducting himself consistently with our understanding about the scope of his investigation.
Right. That really wasn't my question. My question was, has he asked you or consulted with you about a desire to expand the investigation beyond the original scope?
Well, the consultation actually is much more detailed than that. He consults with me, and his office consults with me about their investigation, both within and without the scope. So I know what they're authorized to do.
Yeah, I know you know what they're doing, but has he requested to expand the scope of the original jurisdiction?
But the scope of the original jurisdiction, as you know, is publicly set forth in that order, but the specific matters are not identified in the order. So I discussed that with Director Mueller when he started, and we've had ongoing discussion about exactly what is within the scope of his investigation. And to the extent there was any ambiguity about it, he's received my permission to include those matters within his investigation.
So he has asked to expand the scope, and you've given him permission?
Well, yeah, you're characterizing it as an expansion. As I said, it's a clarification in most cases, but he understands that this is a special counsel. It's not an independent counsel, and I'm accountable for what they're doing, and I need to know what they're doing.
Yeah. Clarification may be an expansion, and we may be caught up on the meaning of those words. But I do think, regardless, I think the American people have a right to know if the original jurisdiction has been expanded. Do you agree with that?
The difficulty, Congressman, is that I have a responsibility not to talk about what's being investigated, and that's why the original order doesn't identify any persons or charges. Right. But we know what's under investigation.
I'm not asking you to go into any specifics or to name names or to even talk about the subject, just whether or not the request had been made to expand it. You said you clarified his jurisdiction. I assume that would involve an expansion, as you suggested.
No, I want to make sure I'm 100% accurate, and I'll need to check and get back to you as to whether or not we considered particular issues to be a clarification or an expansion.
Okay.
But whatever it may be, I'm responsible for, and I know what he's investigating.
Okay. Please do get back to me on the difference between those two. Do you feel that the special counsel is authorized to investigate the personal finances of the Trump family members?
Mr. Congressman, that would implicate the concern that I've expressed that we just don't talk about what's under investigation. So I hope you don't draw any inference pro or con. We're simply not going to discuss it.
Well, do you think the personal finances come under the original jurisdiction of direct involvement of Russian interference with the election?
I certainly appreciate your concern, Congressman, but I hope you appreciate my position that if I start answering what is and isn't, I've gone down that road that I just don't want to go down of discussing what's under investigation. There have been 4 persons who have been charged. Those are known. And ordinarily, the Department of Justice, that's what we publicize. If we charge somebody with a crime, we publicize it. If we don't charge anybody with a crime, we don't talk about it.
But some of the people charged have been charged with crimes not directly connected to Russian interference with the election.
The crimes with which they're charged are publicly known.
Okay. So, in other words, you do feel that the special counsel can go into the personal finances not connected to Russian interference?
I hope I've been clear, Congressman. I am not commenting on the scope of the investigation.
All right. What about, can the special counsel investigate the personal actions of staff unconnected to the Russian interference with the election?
Only if I determine that it's appropriate for him to do so.
Okay, so that's your determination, not the special counsel's.
As I said, Congressman, I know what he's doing. If I felt he was doing something inappropriate, I would take action.
Right. Let me just maybe summarize by saying that I think the American people deserve to know who is being investigated and why. I have one final question in my last couple of seconds here. As you know, and as many of us know, in the Lawyers' Code of Ethics, attorneys are supposed to avoid not just the actual impropriety itself, but the appearance of impropriety. The special counsel has hired at least 8 attorneys who have direct connections to either the Obama or Clinton campaigns. Don't you think that creates an appearance of impropriety? And I'm not saying whether you think they can do their jobs. Don't you think it creates an appearance of impropriety?
I suppose
the time of the gentleman has expired. The witness is permitted to answer the question.
I do not believe, I'm not aware of any impropriety. We do have regulations. The special counsel is subject to all the department's rules and subject to oversight by the department, including the Inspector General. I'm not aware of any violation of those rules by the special counsel employees.
So you don't think it creates the appearance of impropriety?
Well, appearance is to some extent in the eye of the beholder. We apply the department's rules and regulations in making the determinations, and we do have career ethics advisors who provide us counsel about that.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Rosenstein. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Rosenstein, for being here with us today. You're a career attorney in the department, isn't that right?
I would say I was a career attorney.
Was a career attorney.
Yes.
You've spent your whole life working for the people of the United States as a career attorney until you were asked to fulfill the current function that you're
as a U.S. attorney, I was a political appointee. So for the past 12 years, I've been a political appointee. 15 years prior to that, I was a career attorney.
So let me ask you, in taking a look at the individuals who are working on the matters that we are discussing, Are they career attorneys in the department who are working on this?
Some of them are, Congresswoman. Under the regulation, the special counsel is permitted to request the detail of attorneys in the department who he believes will be helpful. He also has authority to hire attorneys from outside the department, and he's used both approaches.
So wouldn't they be subject to the principles, the merit system principles in the Civil Service Reform Act?
Yes, I believe they are.
So, we've been on the committee here for a long time, and I remember back in 2008, there were allegations that the Department of Justice had used politics as a basis for hiring and firing in the department. And the Office of Inspector General and the Office of Professional Responsibility issued a report outlining the impropriety of using politics in personnel decisions. One of the things they said was that the department's policy on non-discrimination includes the Department of Justice needs to seek to eliminate discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, marital status, political affiliation, age, and the like. So wouldn't that policy be governing the actions of the individuals working on this? You couldn't discriminate based on this whole list, including their political affiliation.
Congresswoman, one of the advantages that I bring to the job is having been in and around the department for a while. I've seen mistakes that have been made in the past, and that is precisely one of the issues that I've discussed with our political appointees, that we're not going to do that we are not going to improperly consider political affiliation with regard to career employees of the department.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask about a couple of concerns, and you may or may not have responsibility for this. If so, just let me know. I am concerned that the department has had a change in position on certain important voting rights issues. One has to do with the purging of rolls in Ohio. The department had previously argued against purging those rolls because the National Voter Registration Act prohibits the purging of voters simply because they haven't voted in a given period of time. And it's my understanding that the department is now arguing that Ohio can purge individuals from rolls even without evidence that they have moved. Additionally, the department had argued that the state of Texas ID law had discriminated against individuals, and that the department has changed its position on that, and the law is currently drafted probably excludes up to 600,000 Americans from being able to vote because of the the draconian ID laws. Can you give us any insight into why the department changed its position on these key voting rights issues?
Congresswoman, I'm generally familiar. I don't know all the details of both of those matters, but as a general matter, it's important to understand that the ultimate determination about what the law means is made by a judge. Department officials obviously need to make a decision based upon a good faith analysis of the facts and the law, what position to take. It may be that new leadership of the department takes a different position, but I can assure you that's based on a good faith analysis, and there may be legitimate ambiguity in some of these provisions. And we are responsible for making our determination, just like the prior administration made theirs, but ultimately it'll be up to a judge to decide what that law means.
Let me just ask a final question. It's my understanding that under the order appointing him, Mr. Mueller has the authority to investigate matters that arose or may arise directly from the investigation, which would include crimes uncovered while he is investigating the main mission. So, for example, if he is looking at the Russia investigation and he finds out that the person he's looking at committed a bank robbery, he isn't required to ignore a bank robbery. Would that be a fair assessment of his responsibilities?
It's a fair assessment.
The time of the gentlewoman has expired. Mr. Rosenstein may answer the question.
Congresswoman, it's important to recognize, because it's a special counsel, not an independent counsel, those issues are worked out with the department. So in the event that he came across evidence that was not appropriate for him to prosecute, he could refer it to other components of the department. So we wouldn't allow something like that to slip through the cracks, but we would make sure to route it to the appropriate prosecutor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rosenstein, you already indicated that Mr. Strzok was removed for impropriety. It's beyond me how the other people that were mentioned by the chairman and Mr. Smith were not removed for impropriety as well. Let me ask you, first of all, I assume that the team you put together, you felt was going to be, that Mueller put together was going to be fair and unbiased, correct?
Correct. I selected Mr. Mueller, and
he
made
selected the team.
decisions.
Right. Now, let me just review a few facts about the supposedly unbiased group of people that Mr. Mueller pulled together. 9 of the 16 have made political contributions. To be fair, let's just go through them in alphabetical order. First, Greg Andrus gave $1,000 to the Democrat running to hold the seat, the Senate seat, previously held by Barack Obama. He gave $2,600 to Democrat Senator Gillibrand, who just this week led the charge of Democratic senators demanding that President Trump resign. And oh yeah, Mr. Andrus gave $0 to the Trump campaign, or to any Republican for that matter. Next, again in alphabetical order, Rush Atkinson. He donated to the Clinton campaign last year, again $0 to the Trump campaign. Third, Kelly Freeney contributed to both Obama campaigns and to Hillary Clinton's campaign, $0 to the Trump campaign. Next, Andrew Goldstein. He donated $3,300 to both Obama campaigns, again, $0 to the Trump campaign. Fifth, Elizabeth Prelogar, who clerked for liberal Supreme Court Justices Ginsburg and Kagan, contributed to both the Obama and Clinton campaigns, and $0 to Trump. Next, James Quarles. He's contributed to the Democratic presidential campaigns of Dukakis, Kerry, Obama, and Hillary Clinton, and Gore as well. He did contribute to former Congressman Chaffetz and Senator Allen, but he contributed over $20,000 to Democratic House and Senate candidates, and again gave $0 to Trump. Seventh, Jeannie Rhee. She actually represented, as was previously mentioned, Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation in several lawsuits. She's donated $16,000 to Democrats, contributed $5,400 to the Clinton campaign, and $0 to the Trump campaign. Eighth, Brandon Van Grack contributed to Act Blue, the fundraising outfit organized to elect Democratic congressional candidates, contributed to the Obama presidential campaign, and of course, gave nothing to Trump. And finally, Andrew Weissman, he contributed $2,000 to the Democratic National Committee, $2,300 to the Obama campaign, $2,300 to the Clinton campaign, and $0 to Donald Trump. He's also the guy who praised the holdover acting Attorney General Susan Yates for defying President Trump on the travel ban. Now, my question to you is, how with a straight face can you say that this group of Democrat partisans are unbiased and will give President Trump a fair shake?
Congressman, I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about political affiliation, that all demonstrates political affiliation. The issue of bias is something different. I've discussed this with Director Mueller, and he and I collectively have a lot of experience managing offices in the Department of Justice. We recognize we have employees with political opinions, and it's our responsibility to make sure those opinions do not influence their actions. Pardon me. And so I believe that Director Mueller understands that, and that he is running that office appropriately, recognizing that people have political views, but ensuring that those views are not in any way a factor in how they conduct themselves in office.
Well, when you say he's running it appropriately, I think putting the committee, the people, his investigators together to begin this investigation in the first place is part of the investigation, and how these people, the group he put together, is considered unbiased. I don't know how anyone can possibly reach that conclusion. You know, when this whole Russia was involved in our elections flap surfaced, and you picked Robert Mueller to lead the investigation, I was at first encouraged. It seemed like a serious matter, and it deserved a serious investigation. And I assumed, as many of us did, that Mr. Mueller would pull together an unbiased team. But rather than wearing stripes as umpires and referees might wear, I would submit that the Mueller team overwhelmingly ought to be attired with Democratic donkeys on their jerseys, or I'm with Hillary T-shirts, certainly not with let's make America great again. And I think that's a shame, because I think the American people deserve a lot better than the very biased team that they're getting under Robert Mueller. And I think it's really sad. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Deputy Attorney General, thank you, welcome, and thank you for your service to the nation. Allow me just for a moment, as I move on my questions, to indicate that I am shocked and baffled the way some in the right-wing media and some of our friends on the other side show such contempt for the Department of Justice and the FBI, and so much skepticism or mistrust of the Russian government. Let me briefly review for the record. The FBI and DOJ brought to justice and put away Timothy McVeigh, domestic terrorist who killed 168 Americans, Klansmen who murdered civil rights workers Goodman, Cheney, and Swerner, the Unabomber, terrorists who bombed U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, organized crime family kingpins, the murderer assassinated Medgar Evers, Pan Am 103 bombing, Soviet diplomat that had a spy ring during World War II, Aldra Ames, Richard Hansen, Alger Hiss, and others for espionage, World Trade Center bombing in 1993, TWA 847 hijacking, Lindbergh kidnapping, Beltway snipers, Klansmen who killed 4 little girls in the 16th Street church in Birmingham. And of course, on the other hand, the Russians are known for shooting down a civilian airline, KAL 007, killing 269 passengers and crew.